bicentennial tour around Trissels. I'm going to try to use this little microphone and whatever's left of my high school teaching voice, which isn't much, but we'll do the best we can. First of all, I want to introduce to you, stand up here please, Paul Lehman. Paul, would you stand up here and greet and face them? Most of you know Paul. Stand up here, Paul. You can't sit down that quick. Paul Lehman is the head of school at Eastern Mennonite School in Harrisonburg. He's got a CDL license, and he's driving this Eastern Mennonite School bus for us. So, Paul Lehman is our driver. Thank you very much, Paul. He was my head of school for, 15 years when I worked at Eastern Mennonite High School. Come on in. There's seats in the back of the bus. Welcome.
We're almost there.
Come on in.
We got 3 more.
Harold, greetings.
Is that it?
Thank you to this man here, Robbie Rhodes, for organizing this and making this possible. He's the man.
A lot of work.
I'm very grateful to have been invited to do this afternoon for the Trissels congregation. You know, Trissels really cares about its history.
Yes.
There's this thing called a bicentennial. Now, I'm also finishing up a book right now for the Maple Grove Mennonite Church in Hartville, Ohio. But they've only got 100 years. Only a centennial. You guys have, Trissels has a bicentennial. Think about that. Now, I'm a world history teacher in the past, so I get going on this stuff. But 200 years is like a tenth of the time from now back to Pentecost. Okay? A tenth of that time. And Catherine Shank, who just recently passed away, lived 100 years. And was it 101?
Almost 102.
Almost 102. She lived a tenth of that time from Pentecost to the present. This is a congregation of faith. We all know that. I want to start with a hymn, just a few lyrics of a hymn that we sang this morning at the Fraternal Congregation of Trissels across the way, Zion Mennonite Church, where my wife and I worship. This morning we sang the Fanny Crosby song. Now just a few lines. To God be the glory, great things he hath done. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice, and give him the glory, great things he hath done. To get to 200 years is something significant. And this afternoon we're going to talk about the Rhodeses, the Showalters, the Shanks, the Giles, very little about Yoders. Okay, but we're gonna head over to Broadway for a stop at the Rhodes, historic Rhodes house. Then we're gonna go to the Rhodes Cemetery and be met there by somebody to talk about the cemetery, and we'll look at that. We're gonna drive over to Zion Mennonite Church. Paul and I have talked about how to get this bus in there and out of there, and we'll walk through the Zion Cemetery and talk about some of the people buried there who attended here back in the day. Then we're going to go to the historic Showalter homestead where Glenn and Lois Showalter live today. And they're scheduled to greet us and talk to us a little bit there at their place. And then I'm going to show you what very few people have ever figured out where it is, other than the Brunks, who in the 1970s put the marker there in the field. There's a marker about a mile from here, a little over a mile, to indicate where the Brunks first settled here in the Linville Creek Cedar Run area in 1775. So we'll end up there. I'm just curious, has anybody ever seen the Brunk marker? That's 1.25 miles from this church house.
I've seen it.
You've seen it.
A while back.
One. Brother Roland. Been there, okay.
Is it in Coyote Run?
Huh?
Is it in Coyote Run?
No, that's Jacob Giles.
Hey, we're going to get to, that'll be our last stop. But we'll talk about the Brunks and sort of early 19th century, their history and how that was then lost. And the memory of that is pretty well gone. But in the 70s, they put a marker out there to indicate where the Brunk homestead was. Really the first Mennonites to move into the valley. I think that's all I had in mind. Paul, let's start it up and head it out.
Put the pedal to the metal.
Now, Debbie Rhodes gave you a handout. If I talk while Paul drives, maybe you can still hear me. Go to the second page of your handout. The story number 2, Catherine Rhodes Shank. She is one whom I've centered a lot of my work around. Look at the years of her life, 1831, 1875. Her parents, Samuel, is going to be buried in the Rose Cemetery, where we're going to stop on our second stop today. Catherine Bowman Rhodes, to the best of my knowledge, is buried in the Lidville Creek Church and Cemetery. She lived quite a bit longer than Samuel did. The grandparents of Catherine Rhodes Shank are Henry and Elizabeth, Bishop Henry and Elizabeth Brenneman Rhodes. Now, one of the things you're going to discover when we get to the Rhodes Cemetery is the way in which the name Rhodes, Carl back here has done some work on it. And by the way, on a number of these stops and for a number of these topics, some of you here on this bus will know more than me. And if I need to be corrected, put your hand up and do so. I'm not opposed to that. The name Rhodes goes through a series of, you're going to see Roth, you're going to see R-O-D-E-S in the cemetery. And so I use the name Rhodes. Bishop Henry Rhodes, one of the first bishops here in this area. Catherine and Samuel, 2C, had 6 children. Now, this morning early, after I made all these nice copies, I realized I made one little typo, one little mistake. Catherine and Samuel had 6 children. You see, I've got Roman numerals 1 through 5. Perry should be notched down as child number 6. You see my little mistake there on the outline. She had 6 children, and she died at the age of 43. Catherine is buried at Trissels. Samuel, her husband, is buried over at Zion. We'll see that when we get off in the Zion Cemetery. Samuel's second wife, Mary, is buried over at Zion. Trissels and Zion were fraternal congregations for decades. So they had 6 children. Now, she passed away at the age of 43. As one who watches the news and follows the news a lot, I'm aware of the passing of Queen Elizabeth. How old was she? 96. You know, she's almost a twin, age-wise, of my mother, Esther Yoder. My mother is just a few weeks younger. My mother's 95, will be 96 soon. And I've been reflecting on the meaning of a life of 96 years. What that entails, the different eras of one's life. My mother's still spry and up around and can drive a car and does once in a while. Catherine passed away at 43, a relatively young woman. She had 6 children. Now, the book here's a proof. A few of you in here are on the book committee. This is what the cover is going to look like. The book is at the printers. The Trissels Mennonite Church book is at the printers. I haven't heard anything for a month, so I'm hoping there's paper available. There's a paper problem in the supply chain world out there, I'm told, and that's just the reality. But they're working on this. We call it Under the Oaks. There'd be a photo of Catherine's grave out there. But since I worked on the book, even just this summer, I've learned of David Shank. Now look at the years of his life. Passed away in 1910. He married a woman from Missouri. We're going to make a left here. Now, David Shank, the oldest son of Catherine Rose Shank, they had a daughter by the name of Icy. See her name there, Icy Shank. She married a fellow from, I believe he was from Denby. Yes. David Shank. And they had a son, they had one son. His name was Stanley Shank. I remember years ago when Stanley Shank, a longtime prof at Goshen College, wrote Sunday school curriculum. Maybe some of you might remember the name Stanley Shank. That's their son. He's the son of David, who was one of the sons of Catherine and Samuel. Now, somebody alerted me to this sad story, so I dug it out. Again, since I finished the book, basically this summer, there's an obituary in the Gospel Herald. It's a very sad obituary. David Shank took his own life. He came back from Missouri, where they'd been living. The obituary says they looked at his old, at the old home place here, visited family, and they found him in the barn. So he passed away. That's the oldest son. Charles Shank, you see there, is a half brother to Stanley, and in Harrisonburg live Steve and Karen Moser Shank, would be children of them. But David had one daughter, Icy, and there are descendants out there, even though his life ended earlier than, it was just a really sad, I don't know who wrote the obituary, but it was a very sad obituary. Lois Shank, one of Catherine's sons, probably has the longest tenure of being a bishop in the Northern District, maybe in the Virginia Conference. Lois Shank was a bishop for many, many years, for over 40 years in the Northern District and Virginia Conference. He married Maddie Martin Shank. They didn't have any children. You see the 6 children. Sarah married a brother and man, David Ziegler. John Shank, I think, also married a brother and woman. Perry then married Katie Shank, and they had 5 children. J. Ward Shank, Roland's here, a son of J. Ward Shank. David Paul Shank.
Daughter.
Oh, okay. John F. Shank married Katie Brunk. Sam Shank married Catherine Showalter Shank. And Martha Shank Wisson, one of the daughters, married Clarence Wisson. Donna Rhodes is over there. Wave, Donna. She owns the house. This is her brother, Gary.
Welcome everybody to Broadview Farms. This is where I grew up. That's where my sister grew up. And I want to tell about the most important thing first. Now, these pickles right here come from Mary Emma Eby in the Mennonite Cookbook. And my sister has been making these for years, and they are the best pickles that we've ever had in Delaware, where I live. So I've got a can for every family. If you'd like to take one home, make sure you take one home. So a lot of them are last year's pickles. I want to talk about this farm as far back as the stories came to me. It goes back to the Civil War days. In the Civil War, the Union soldiers camped on this farm. A lot of them, they say, out there. But they took over this whole farm. There was a story about how the ladies made pies every once a week like they used to do. And the Union soldiers would take the pies. And they just confiscate them and take them, and I guess they had a good time with them. So that's, there is some Civil War artifacts that were recovered thanks to Uncle Barry Rhodes that are right here. This right here, they tell me, probably was, and the one right next to it, was probably a Union teacup. Then that was found on this farm, and probably afterwards the Confederates used this as a canteen. There's also like a handle to a sword. Different articles right here probably came from that era, possibly. Another story I was told when I was growing up here, they said that you used to work the ground out here with mules, a pair of mules. And they said two mules were worth a lot more than horses, because mules would last all day, a horse would last a half a day. I don't know if that's true or not. But we had a dinner bell, and dinner bell was up in this yard, and when they rang that dinner bell, back in those days, that was the biggest meal of the day. And all the farm hands and all the ladies, everybody loved to fix dinner, eat dinner. When that bell rang, everybody came running. Those two mules, they say, would stop right in their tracks out in that field when that bell rang, because they got to come in too. So that's the story they talk about. I want to talk about some of the pictures, but before I do that, the name of Broadview Farms came about back in the day, I understand, way back when families used to visit from the Midwest or far off. They used to come into a farm like this one, and they did. Some of our relatives from out in the Midwest, they came, stayed 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Now when they came, they just didn't sit and visit, they put them to work. So whatever they did, they would have a good time doing that and get to visit and catch up. But in the evening time, as the sun was going down, they had a porch over there, and they were overlooking this great Shenandoah Valley of ours and Appalachian Range out here. And one of the ladies from out in the Midwest says, "My, what a broad view from here." And that's where the name came from this farm, from what I understand. So this was a very, very important purebred Guernsey dairy farm back in the day. There's pictures here. Miller Rhodes, he was as one of the early founders of this farm, or one of the early workers of this farm. He was the first president of Shenandoah's Pride Dairy, if anybody ever remembers what that business was. A.C. Wisson married Nellie Rhodes, and he was the president from 1960 to 1973. Right here is a picture of what the old farm looked like. I want to talk about this house that sits right there. There's a picture of this house. This was built in 1903 by Miller. Now, a lot of the people, I think in the early days, went to Zion Mennonite Church. My family, we lived in the lower house, which would have been this one right here. We went to Trissels Mennonite Church, is where we were raised up. This right here is a pretty cool thing. It's a nice plaque this farm got in 1964 for having 45 years of Dairy Herd Improvement Association records. That meant that all the milk records once a month were recorded. They would come in and test the milk, and then they would breed for better milk production, better Guernsey cows. I understand at one time at this farm, back these ribbons are ribbons that were won from some of the stock right off this farm from 1937 to 1969. There were 2 preeminent purebred Guernsey herds in America back in those days, especially the early years, 30s and 40s. And the 2 herds were Broadview Farms, were one of the preeminent purebred Guernsey herds in all of this country. The second one, it might have been from a fellow you may have heard of by the name of J.C. Penney out of Cortland, New York. So that was 2 of the ones that they had. On this property, as you see, that house was built in 1903. It was added on to. Right behind that is what they have, is that we call it the wash house. So that's what they used to do. They used to wash clothes in that house. Then way down in the corner of the property right there, you see a little smokehouse. And that was a smokehouse, but they also told stories about they used to harvest ice in the wintertime when it used to get really cold. They buried that in sawdust, and they said they used to have ice here until July 4th, so they could go out and cut ice. I don't know if any of those stories are true. That's stories that were told to me. So, my father was Don. His brother was Robert. He had a brother named Charles and a sister named Nancy. Now, where you're all standing was a big, big thing in the summer times back when these boys were growing up, because they all loved Major League Baseball, and they all had their own team. So there wasn't a whole lot to do back in those days, but they played baseball on Sunday afternoons, and they memorized each of their team's batting averages and ERAs for all their people that they had. So my dad was a Cleveland Indians fan, and I think Robert was a Detroit fan, and Charles was a New York Yankees fan, and they all just used to fight and fuss over the games and all that. That's how the brothers grew up.
Might mention that Roland Shanks played ball with them here.
Roland? Yeah, and Roland used to play ball, so you can attest to that's what happened.
Home plate was right over here.
That was home plate, yeah. So Miller's father, his name was Reuben Rhodes. Yeah. Now Reuben Rhodes, he took and did some very bad thing one Sunday morning. He decided to skip church and go rabbit hunting out that way, and he shot into a pile, or one of his friends shot into a pile, and the bees came back and hit him in the eyes. He was blinded the rest of his life. They always said he got blinded because he didn't go to church. But the boys, when Reuben was getting older, they would lead him out in that pasture way down there and all run back here and see if he could find his way back blinded. and they would just sit there and laugh and have a good time. So that's what they did. It was good natured. He always found his way back. So that right there behind you is the calf barn. That barn right there is where we raised calves, and we had one of the greatest playhouses that were built on this end of it. As kids growing up, it was the premier playhouse when us kids were being raised up, and it's still in there, but it's kind of nasty right now, but it was great. It was all made up. And I'll just finish here one last time. I got to tell a story about back when I was they didn't have kindergarten when I was growing up, so probably about that time, the old ladies that were in this house at the time always put me to bed, and I hated it. I'd go up to bed, and they'd be down there cackling and laughing and whatever they were doing, and one day I decided I'd had enough of it. So down the steps I went, flew out in that front field, went all the way around there. My dad was up on up there on the range, up there on a turkey range. And he said, "Boy, what are you doing here?" He says, "Oh, women, I'm getting tired of them putting me to bed." He said, "You stay with me." Well, from that day on, I've been working. What's the matter with me? I'd love to take a nap today. So, do I have any questions from anybody? Thank you all, and make sure you please get some pickles. One more comment I want to say, so religious basis. Okay. We talk about trusting in the Lord, and we talk about being not afraid. One of the great bulls that came off this farm, his name is Fearless Knight. Wouldn't it be great if we can go through the rest of our life and have a fearless knight because we have the Lord on our side? Thank you.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you.
Roland, do you want to say anything about the Shank house that used to be down the road here?
Right this way.
Well, there's a Shank house there, and if you look at the photo,
Oh, okay.
if you look at the photo on page 3, can you pick out this house? On the clear right of that photo is this house. And there was another, the Abraham Shank house was down this way, or was it the other way?
That was over on Sunset Drive.
Okay. You want to say something about the Shank house that way?
Yeah, well, that's my grandparents' place, Perry Shank, right next door here. The house was burned during the Civil War, and the barn, and the bricks for the house were made just about 300 yards beyond this house here, where you can still see where they excavated, for the clay to make the bricks for the house. That was my home up here on the hill here. Had orchard up there where the tower is, and up here where these houses are. Donna Rhodes would sometimes be walking from the house to the barn down here. On some days, the sounds were so clear you could hear dogs barking from here to there, things like that. I would yell from up there at the top of the hill, "Hey, Don!" And he would hear me, and we would talk. We would hear at the top of that hill.
Wow.
That's enough.
Thank you, Roland. As Roland said, just down the way here is the Sam and Catherine Rhodes Shank house that they built before the Civil War. And on the day of the burning, October 6, 1864, the barn was set on fire and the sparks came over and burned the house down.
That's the picture in the back.
Right. You can see on the last page of your handout a sketch drawing of that by John Shank, or by John Gaiman, and a photo from some years ago by Robert Hewitt. The photo is in color in both the Trissels and the Zion history books. So you'll get the photo a little bit later as the drawings in the Zion history book. The Shanks rebuilt. Catherine Rhodes Shank, Samuel Shank, they rebuilt after the war. They had 5 children when the burning took place. One more was born. Perry, I believe, was born after the war. And that would be Roland's grandfather. Yeah. So the Shank house that way, and to the best of my understanding, if you look at the photo on page 3, there was a big farm right here, but it got taken away in the name of development in the past. Now this photo comes from Donna Rhodes' collection over here. Donna helped me out on the Zion book, and she gave me some additional help on the Trissels book, and I'm very grateful for that. I have a bunch of stuff, genealogical stuff, on your handout. You can look at that. Suffice it to say, we're at the place of Miller D. Rhodes. Now, I'll just say one thing, and then we'll head over to the Rhodes Cemetery. Take a look at the photo of Miller D. Rhodes. As has been indicated, he was an outstanding businessman. Whatever he put his hands to, he made money at. He had a registered Guernsey dairy, a coal dealership, a service station, and organized, as we've heard, the Shenandoah Pride Dairy Products. He was very successful in business here in the Broadway area. In the 30s and 40s, folks, in the Virginia Mennonite Conference, it was an age of conservatism, fundamentalism. Bow ties were highly frowned upon by Bishop Lois Showalter, Bishop J. Ward Shank. Bow ties were frowned upon. Miller D. Rhodes never gave his up. He just kept wearing it. I'm writing the chapter right now for the new Virginia Mennonite Conference history book that Steve Knowlton and I are working on, and I'm trying to get a hold of the 30s and the 40s. And every once in a while I come across these stories like a Miller D. Rhodes, and there are other men who are the same way. They would never give up those little bow ties. It meant that they were second class in the church. It meant that they couldn't lead singing or teach Sunday school or ever get in the lot for a minister. But Miller D. Rhodes went on with his business, went to church, was involved, but he was in that second tier. And that's the nature of what it was like in the 30s and 40s. There was a guy down in the Denby colony that did the same thing. Just kept wearing his bow tie, and there's these little undercurrents of people. Every once in a while you hear somebody in the 40s that has a radio in their car. They're not supposed to have radios. You know, these little things where the people are on the edges going against the rules. Maybe I should point out, if you look at page 4, there's something that is absolutely unparalleled in the Virginia Mennonite Conference history. I'm so glad that Roland is here, one of the sons of J. Ward Shank. There were 5 generations of Shank bishops in Virginia Mennonite Conference. There were 2 Blossers in the Middle District. There were a couple of driver men in the Southern District. They were father and son. But there were 5 in a row. Now, the first 3, Henry Abraham, who built a house just right down here in that photo, and then Henry Samuel Sr. and Abraham Shank, father, son, and son. Bishops in a row. Okay? Now, Lewis Shank was a nephew of Abraham, and then J. Ward was a son of Perry Shank. But it was 5 generations of Shank men, all ordained by the lot. Okay? So you had to go through the lot to be a minister, and sometimes deacon to begin with, and then you become a minister, ordained again by lot, you know, a number of men, and then for bishop. Now, often for bishop, there were only 2 men that were nominated, but that's completely unparalleled. 5 generations of Shank men, and that's right here in this community. Maybe that's enough on that. Any questions or comments? Anybody has anything I've said that's incorrect, or want to add something? Reverend Abraham Shank.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at that. There it is. 3 cent.
Yeah.
3 cent stamp. Well, thank you very much, Donna and Gary, for meeting us here. Don't forget your pickles. Let's load back up on the bus and go to the Rhodes Cemetery.
Get up there, pickle.
David, you see the hillside over there?
Cemetery. Carl Rhodes is here. I believe he lives in Richmond.
I do.
Descendant of the Rhodes, knows about the cemetery, sent me a very nice map. So I have a little map of the cemetery. Talk about what we're in front of here, Carl.
Okay. The cemetery started right behind you in about 1808, I believe. And at that point, they were using the name Roth or Roth. And then it comes chronologically from there. The one at the far end is not the unknown one, but the one beside that. That's probably Isaac Brenneman. And then you start with
Maria Roth.
Maria Roth, and then they're all Roth down through here until you get to Henry. So Henry dies in 1827. He insists on using the name Roth, but then his son Samuel, who's right behind him there somewhere, switches it to Rhodes five years later. And then Henry's wife, a few years after that, uses Rhodes. So it goes from Roth to Rhodes in about just a few years there. And then the variations after that are all here. You've got RHOADES and RODES, and there's a little 2-year-old over there that's just RODE. So,
Who maintains this cemetery?
now that I don't know. I know there's an association, and there might be some people here that are part of it. Someone said John C. Rhodes was one of the first to do something with it. But
He was an older Mennonite deacon who, the cemetery was in poor repair and cattle were running through it, and he put the fence up, put the signs up, probably in the 80s, I'm not sure. But it was going downhill.
Yeah.
and they really cleaned up these stones too. You can read them better now than you could 20 years ago.
This one is Elizabeth Funk. She was the first wife of Joseph Funk.
Right. Oh, really?
Yes.
Joseph Funk married Elizabeth Rhodes. That's right. And she passed away after she and Joseph had maybe 4 or 5 children. She passed away in 1814. Joseph remarried to a woman from outside the Mennonite faith. And that sort of made a difference in Joseph's life later on. But his first wife was buried right here. Joseph is buried over in Singer's Glen, in the cemetery in Singer's Glen.
Joseph Funk is no longer living, is he?
Who?
Joe Funk is no longer living, is he?
Joe Funk?
Joseph Funk?
No.
When did he die, did you know?
1862 or 3, I believe.
1860
I think
Civil
he's
War
talking
era.
He's talking of a relative.
There's
Oh, okay. Did Joseph Funk have a son named Joseph Funk?
not sure of that.
It doesn't-
There's a big
Yeah.
rally next weekend, a big event in Singer's Glen. Every 5 years they put on the Alice Parker musical. I've never seen that. And so next weekend, Lord willing, I want to go to that. It's going to be live on Saturday and on Sunday afternoon in Singer's Glen. It's the story, early 19th century, the story of Joseph Funk.
Well, I knew a Joseph Funk. He lived in Singer's Glen and had a sawmill back on Peter Driver Lane. I wasn't sure if it was the same one or
No, this is Joseph Funk from the early 19th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a descendant. It's a descendant.
But
Okay.
the couple that Carl started with here, Henry and Elizabeth Rhodes. How many of y'all are descended in this group from Henry and Elizabeth? One way or the other. Put your hands up. We've got 7 or 8 here. These are 7th generation, I believe, descendants of Henry and Elizabeth Rhodes. Okay? I started off talking about Catherine Rhodes, okay, a granddaughter of this couple, and she married Samuel Shank, who was a minister then here in the Northern District.
And she's buried right there in that corner right there.
Who's that?
Shank, the
Oh,
widow of Preacher Shank is right there in the corner. There.
Oh, the widow of Samuel Sr.
Yes.
Yeah. The widow of Samuel Sr. is right here. There's 2 Samuels, Samuel Sr. and Samuel Jr. Shank. Samuel Sr. was the bishop. Samuel Jr. was a minister.
Great-grandmother there.
Say that again, Roland.
Our great-great-grandmother, Jeannie and I.
Oh my goodness. So this is living history. I mean, the relatives, descendants here of the folks in this cemetery. And as you can see, as I believe Wayne said over here, it's well kept. There's an association of people that maintain the fence every once in a while, come in here and mow it, and watch over it. It's a nice little place. People can drive by. Sorry.
My parents have the last 2 plots here, and they
Oh.
come and help maintain it. James and Leanna Rhodes.
Did you everybody hear that? Say that again.
My parents, James and Leanna Rhodes, have the last 2 plots in the cemetery that they've gotten for themselves, and they help maintain it as well.
What are these unmarked graves back here? They're all unmarked.
Here's a map. That's right. There's 4 that are simply unknown. There's 4 with question marks. We don't know who they are. Yeah. So there's a Rhodes couple here in the valley who have 2 plots and may use them, or at least they have them.
They plan to be buried here.
There you go. But the comment here about gravestones that are unknown. Don Lohr, where's Don?
Right beside you.
He's the administrator at the Trissels Cemetery. I worked pretty hard to get this number out of him. He tells me there are 1,000 burials at Trissels. Which way is Trissels? Probably right that over there, just across the ridge. Zion doesn't have nearly that many burials. In the Zion Church, Tony Brenneman, where's Tony? One of the administrators at Zion Cemetery, he says we have 392, that was a few months ago, burials. So 392 burials at Zion. Can't quite see Zion from here. It's right over there. About 1,000 at Trissels. But many of those at Trissels are unknown, not marked. These grave markers over time, over the decades, will wear down. And unless somebody in the family cares enough to keep after them and once in a while replace them, after a while, Carl gave me this map, you put a big question mark because you don't know who's there. That's what a grave is. I'm watching the clock here. Across the way at Zion, 2 years ago, Tony Brenneman and some others engineered a columbarium. We put up a big columbarium for cremains. And increasingly, some of our people at Zion are buying what's called a niche, where you put a little vial of cremains in there. So that's another option. Tony told me here recently that the Zion Cemetery will fill up within 50 to 60 years at our current rate of use. I don't know what you've factored out over at Trissels. You've got that one section that you're moving out into, sort of the old part of the church. But you know, cemeteries is kind of a big deal. The churches in Harrisonburg, the Mennonite churches, Harrisonburg Mennonite, Parkview, Community, Ridgeway, they've been reaching out to us at Trissels and Zion saying, hey, there's a lot of baby boomers, and can we use your cemeteries? So cemeteries have to figure out what their policies are, and yes, at Zion we're very open to anybody that would like to use the cemetery for a burial or the columbarium. This is a place where you can come out of Harrisonburg and go to church at Zion or Trissels and miss this cemetery altogether. You never know it's here. But you can see it sort of from the road. Here's this chain link fence. And it's just a nice historic site. Robbie Rhodes brought me out here a couple years ago to show me the place when I was getting started. And I like this Henry and Elizabeth Rhodes. Now, yes?
Last month we showed the video from 25 years ago of the presentation that Grace Showalter had written. If you remember, Tim Mumbauer played Henry Rhodes, who's right here in that video.
Yeah.
Sharon has a question.
Yeah, Sharon.
Well, traditionally, haven't all these churches, Parkview, Harrisonburg, Mennonite, etc., used the Weaver Cemetery, and is that cemetery full?
They're just looking at what the other options are, and there's all kinds of ideas in the world about burial and what to do with, the deceased. And they've been reaching out to the churches with cemeteries to find out what policies are. I don't think Weaver's is full yet, and that's always an option. Grace Showalter. Now we're starting to make a transition from Rhodes and Shanks over to Showalter here in the valley. Grace Showalter, in 1980, published an article in the Pennsylvania Mennonite Heritage. And everybody that works on the Showalters in the valley and the Rhodes in the valley goes back to that article. She did a scholarly article. She was working at EMU, in the Historical Library, and I don't know how long she worked at it, but when I discovered that I had a scholarly article on the roads in the valley, written by Grace Showalter, and she did that that article came out of the 150th year musical that was written for Trissels. Out of that, she began taking some things and wrote a very scholarly article. Anybody that wants to work on knowing about the roads in the valley will go back to 1980 Grace Showalter and the Pennsylvania Mountain Heritage, and you can bank on everything in there in terms of the roads here in the valley. It was really a nice contribution that she made. Any other comments or questions before we walk back?
Yeah. Elwood, I just realized these are not unknown right here. These are, I believe, footstones to the headstones. You see how they match? This is Elizabeth's footstone, Henry's footstone, and so on down the line.
It's those up there that are the unknown.
Yeah.
They might be footstones too.
The one on the far side says unknown.
So,
yeah, normally if they've got the initials of the person buried, they're a footstone.
Yeah, this is an MR.
maintaining a cemetery takes a lot of work, takes some money, cleaning the stones every once in a while. It's a lot of work. And for these people that do it, my hat's off to you cemetery administrators. I think we're going to walk back and then drive over to Zion. I'm not sure in light of the time whether we can get off over there, but at least we'll stop over there and we'll say a few words about Showalters in the valley. So let's walk back to the bus. Some of you noticed that we made a left. Sorry. We made a left on off of 42 instead of a right. I decided that we're going to skip the Zion Cemetery. Come on over someday and I'll take you out and show you the Zion Cemetery. I've got some details in your handout about some of the people buried over there. Well, we're going to talk Showalters here with Glenn and Lois Showalter. So we're going to shift a little bit to Showalters, and then our last stop will be the Brunk.
Okay, I'm Glenn Showalter. I live here. The fifth generation of Showalters here. The farm was bought back in 1820 by my great-great-grandfather Daniel, which was a minister, Mennonite minister, and I don't know if he even might have been the first minister at Trissels or not. I don't know if anybody knows any of that or not. But anyhow, then my grandfather, I don't know, there might be a few on here at UHDH Showalter. Probably not too many. He lived here then. He bought the farm. His parents, his father died when he was 6 years old. He was, when the Civil War broke out, he was headed north to Pennsylvania to try to stay out of the war because of the conscientious objector, and he got caught and was sent to Richmond and was imprisoned there and got tuberculosis during the time he was there. And after he was out, he lived a few years, but then he died. And my grandfather, H.T.H., was just 6 years old at the time. And his mother kept the farm going. It was 112 acres with help of some older siblings and hard help. Anyhow, the Civil War played a big part here in the farm. The barn was set on fire, but a maid that was working here saw the soldiers come out of the barn, and she went out and was able to get the fire out before it really got started. And different people have found casings and shells out in this field here to the south. They said it was a camp there at one time. I don't know of any battles or anything, but they Found a lot of things, and I was given a few things. Most of the people who was there with finding usually wouldn't tell me what they found, or they would just take. But I had one guy that did give me a bunch of things that he found there. I don't know, does anybody have any questions or anything else that...
So the barn is pre-Civil War.
Yes.
It's one of the few barns in the area that
didn't burn.
That
wasn't burned yet. It's put together with wooden pegs. And,
you know what year this house was built?
Not for sure, but we know it was here in 1825. Somewhere between 1820 and 1825. I don't know, does anybody have any questions? I don't know. I might be able to answer them, maybe not, I don't know.
Are Chris and Liesl going to take over the farm after you and Lois are retired, or are they still?
Probably so. Their children are the 7th generation. In fact, Levi's, he's graduating from mechanic school, and he worked here on the farm this summer. Now he's showing interest, so I think maybe he's going to take over. See, he would be the 7th generation.
2 years ago, I came out here, I called up and made arrangements to come out here and visit. I wanted to meet Glenn and Lois. I pulled in over here and I got out. And Glenn met me here in the parking lot. This is a good story. And we talked, and it was a hot summer day. I got out and we stood there and talked a while. Glenn was, I think, sort of sizing up who this Yoder man was.
Yeah.
I didn't bear the name of Rhodes or Shank or Showalter or Brunk.
Guile.
Sorry.
Or Guile.
Or Guile. So we stood here and talked a while, and I wasn't quite sure whether Glenn was going to invite me in or not. So we started talking, and then at one point, Glenn said, "You wouldn't be related to Wayne Yoder, would you?" Well, there's a number of Wayne Yoders as you can imagine around. So we pinned it down to Hartville, Ohio, Wayne Yoder. And we started realizing that my uncle, Wayne Yoder, had served with Glenn in Europe in packs after World War II. Wayne and Glenn were cohorts. I don't know where you were working.
He was my unit leader in Salzburg, Austria. We were building homes for Yugoslavia refugees.
So every once in a while, those packs men and women get together. And I asked my Uncle Wayne later, and he said, yeah, he's been in the Showalter home here for dinner. Glenn and Lois had those Pax men here for a reunion. And so the end of the story is, we're standing here, and I'm starting to sweat like I'm doing now. He was checking me out. As soon as he knew that I was Wayne Yoder's nephew, in we went to the house. That's a true story. It's just a fun story. He figured out where I fit in the world, and in we went. And then Lois, hello Lois. Lois and Glenn, they helped me out with some photos. There's a photo of this farm from the 1800s. It's a really good photo, a farming photo of farmers. They're wearing their 19th century hats. And I'd only ever seen that photo in magazines. I wanted a copy of that for the Trissels book, but I needed a print to scan to make a good page. Hi, Lois. Good morning. Sorry?
Bring it out.
No, don't bring it out. So they had a copy of the farm from the late 1800s.
Wow.
I've got a picture in the Trissels book of the farm from the 20th century, and then one from Sean Raymer. Raymer took one in the 21st century, so 3 different centuries of this farm in the Showalter family. This is Lois. Welcome in. Say hello to everybody. Is there anything you want to say to them? What we did, Glenn and Lois, we skipped Zion Cemetery altogether because I misjudged on the amount of time. On your paper somewhere, and mine's outside the bus here right now, on your paper, on page number 1, take a look at these generations that Glenn was talking about. Can you find HTH 5th generation, number 5 over on the side?
Yes.
And so Glenn's father was Howard DeWitt. Howard DeWitt. So that's the connection there. I tried to outline the generations. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful. I think I've got Maggie and Magdalene on there twice. Same person, I believe. Down in generation 6. But those are the generations. Now, I got a hold of David Augsburger. Lois, you said David Augsburger married you.
He married us, yes.
David Augsburger was a 20-something pastor, a young man, came to Trissels in the early 60s. Served there during the 60s and up to about 71. And so he married you in the church over there at Trissels.
No, we were married in Pennsylvania. Lois is from Lancaster, so we were married.
So he drove up there to marry you up
he
there.
He drove up there to marry us up there. Yeah.
So David is coming next month, October 21, 22, 23, for the bicentennial event. I had a Zoom interview. David Augsburger lives in California. I had a Zoom interview with David Augsburger. And David at one point said, you know, as a young man, I soon figured out that there were two family systems of Showalters. He soon figured out that there were 2 streams. And he said, you know, he kind of had to watch when you set up a ballot for like a committee or a vote or something. You know, you kind of had to watch the Showalters, and you had to be aware there was these 2 streams. Can you see it there on page 1? You've got the Daniel Jr. and then Michael Showalter, and there are these 2 families of Showalters. Down below, George and Elizabeth children were Noah, Timothy, George, MC Showalter, Dwayne's grandfather. So there were these 2 different systems of Showalters. And as a very young man, David Augsburger, you know, he was growing his hair long and speaking out against the Vietnam War on the Mennonite Hour. And they almost canned him. They almost said you had to stop. But then he appealed. The local board said you got to stop talking about the U.S. involvement in Southeast Asia, because he was going on the microphone on the Mennonite Hour and criticizing U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And David said, well, I'd like to appeal to the full Mennonite Hour board across the country. He did that, and the full board across the country backed him up and said, yeah, keep talking about Vietnam and the U.S. involvement over there in Southeast Asia. I might be taking his stories away. He's going to tell stories, and whatever I got from him from that 1-hour interview is going to be in the book. He's a great storyteller, very alert, and is coming back. You won't want to miss David. I think he speaks Friday evening, October 21, and then again Sunday morning on the 23rd there at Trissels. Any more stories you think of, Glenn or Lois?
George Showalter and HDH Showalter wanted to give money to start the Mennonite home. They talked about it, I think in 1920 or something. They was talking about it. They were cousins. And in George's will, he left $1,000 for the Mennonite, to start the Mennonite home. And HDH had matched it. And then it was, I don't know, quite a few years, I think, until after they actually started it because of the war.
That was the beginning of VMRC.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beginning of VMRC as we know today. That's right. Welby Showalter of that lower group there. No, Welby, Owen's son, one of Owen's sons. Has some other brothers here of Welby. Welby wrote a paper when he was in college about HDH Showalter. And everybody that does work on the Showalters goes back to Welby's paper. See, when Welby was in college, he was a history major. And he wrote a really an outstanding college level paper on H.D. Showalter, and I've used that for the Zion book, the Trissels book, and I've said many times, and anybody else that writes about the Showalters eventually gets back to Welby's paper that he wrote, I think in the late 70s, when he was going to Eastern Mennonite College. Anything else here? Now, what else have I missed? Oh, do you see where Mary Emma Showalter fits in? Can you see her name in the HDH family? Would it be your aunt?
And she was born and raised here.
Yeah. So Mary Emma Showalter was born and raised here. She, of course, wrote the outstanding book, Mennonite Community Cookbook. It's the #1 selling book of any EMU professor down to today. Sold many, many copies. Just this past week, I discovered Mary Emma's story during World War II. She voluntarily signed up for civilian public service. She went as a dietitian down to Grottoes to work in the camp, and she did a good job, and they noticed, and she was then sent across the United States to different CPS camps. She was trying to help them feed the men on a little bit of money, and she was trying to help them reduce costs. You know, have a healthy diet, nutrition, but yet reduce the cost of food. She traveled all over the place. She did that for about 2 years. I discovered that when Mary Emma, she was a student at Madison College. I don't know if you remember that. Mary Emma went to Madison College when it was a women's school, all women. She got her degree in dietetics. In the spring of her senior year, I found in her files this past week this little speech that she gave. In the spring of her senior year, she was talking to her advisor at Madison College. She said she thinks she's going to go into CPS and serve that way. And the professor at Madison College said, "Oh, why would you do that? You and your boys are not fighting this war, and we're going to, you know, they should be overseas fighting the war." And Mary Emma said, "Well, you're talking about my brothers, my cousins, my friends, the Trissels, and so forth." And Mary Emma said, "And that's me." She said, "I'm not involved in, I don't want to support that war." Mary Emma did CPS for 2 years. And then, she did such a good job. There was a new organization under the United Nations that borrowed some select people from MCC to go overseas. And Mary Emma ended up in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt for 18 or 19 months, then served up in Europe. And when she came back, she went around telling the story of her time in CPS. Her story is fairly well documented, but that account of being in the Sinai Peninsula, I found it recently. This farm girl from this farm ended up in the Sinai Peninsula. She was helping to feed Yugoslav and Greek refugees from World War II. And she was, at one point she was told, "Don't make us Pennsylvania, don't make us, you know, American Mennonite meals." People there in the refugee camp wanted something other than, you know, mashed potatoes and gravy. So she had to work at changing her menu over there in Egypt.
And she also went to Penn State.
Right. She got a doctorate later. Yeah. She got a doctorate. But the Mennonite Community Cookbook is pretty outstanding there. What else?
She also started the home economics
Yes.
program at EM.
She started the home economics program. Well, at one point, Mary Emma was offered a job at Goshen College and Eastern Mennonite College. And they were both trying to get her. She wrote at one point, she said, "I couldn't imagine working somewhere without having the mountains around me in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia." So she took the job here rather than Goshen College. Did anybody know Annabelle Showalter, Anna B. Showalter? Got a handful of you. Anna B., if we would have gone to Zion Cemetery, I would have stopped with Timothy and Susie's stones and the 7 daughters that are all lined up.
I didn't realize that.
Their 7 daughters are all lined up in a row.
None of them were ever married.
None of them ever married. Anna was the oldest. When I did the Zion book, Trissels book, Anna's story never registered. I never saw that story in the materials. Now that I'm working on the conference book, a little bit different story. All of a sudden, in the 30s and 40s, Annabelle Showalter, single woman, in her 30s, maybe 40s, all of a sudden, she's writing in the Gospel Herald, she's writing in the Missionary Light, and her story just pops forward. And I asked Carla Showalter Souter, do you have a photo of Annabelle Showalter? Because there's 3 Anna Showalters. Got to get the right one. And Carla had one. I have a little photo of Annabelle, and I'm going to run that. I want to run that in the book because I tell her story. And here's this plain Mennonite woman from about 1930, 35. She came home when Timothy was ordained bishop in the mid-40s. She came home from her work at the Knoxville Mennonite Mission. She'd been working in Knoxville. She came back to help on the farm so that Timothy could go out and do his responsibilities.
There was one boy in the family, Daniel.
Yeah.
We called him Daniel in the girls' den.
Daniel in the girls' den.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to say, Tide Springs, I'm sorry it didn't work out to go to Tide Springs. But anytime, if you're all welcome to go anytime you want to, and if a bunch of you want to go sometime, sometimes I do take wagon loads or trailer loads up to do it. And right now, we've been so dry this summer, it's barely flowing. So your chances of seeing the flow would be very slim.
So where's Robbie? Are we going to do something different than Tide Spring at the end? What are we going to do other than Tide Spring?
We're going to Cedar Run for our hot dog.
Okay. Cedar Run for the hot dog roast. Glenn was born here in this house, and we say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Have a good day. I don't think anybody on this bus knows where the Brunk family marker is. Maybe one. Roland has an idea. We'll talk a little bit about the very first Mennonites to move in the area, even prior to the Giles and the Showalters and the Rhodes. We'll try. It's going to be a farm lane. We'll drive in. We'll look at it. We'll turn around and come back. So it won't be very much longer. It'll take us 15 minutes from when we leave the church until we get back. It's only a mile from the church.
Yeah, right. So it's not a tombstone.
No, it's a marker.
Yeah.
Well,
they can function as a tombstone.
But it says probable burials.
Oh.
See what it says there? Likely Jacob Brunk and his wife and George Brunk, 1840, are buried here. Now, let's start with that year, 1775. American history students, what's going on in colonial America in 1775?
Revolutionary.
Battle of Bunker Hill. I mean, the very beginning.
Pretty close to the Tea Party.
Yeah, Boston Tea Party. I mean, it's right at the beginning when the Patriots are deciding whether they can fight. I'm weird because I'm a history teacher, and with the passing of Queen Elizabeth, I remember, oh yeah, we left the British realm in the Revolutionary War. You know, we separated ourselves from them. With the Revolutionary War, that's what it was all about, to separate ourselves from a monarchy. At the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, this Jacob Brunk I was deeded 69 acres in this area, 69 acres west of Trissels. Who would you guess was the governor of Virginia who signed that deed for Jacob Brunk I in 1775? I say, somebody said it.
I read it off.
Oh, you're good. She's a teacher. Patrick Henry signed that deed.
Wow.
Jacob Brunk. 69 acres here west of Trissels Church. In 1978, the best of my understanding is Gerald Brunk, who's still living, and Harry A. Brunk, the historian who wrote the 2-volume history book about Mennonites in Virginia, decided to come out here and put up a marker. Because otherwise, and they're exactly right, otherwise the story of the Brunks west of Trissels would be totally forgotten. Unless you dig in some book somewhere, which people don't do much. Commentary there. Jacob Brunk, then his son Jacob Brunk II, and his son George Brunk, who passed in 1840, are probably buried here. 3 generations of Brunks. And then 4 generations of the Taylor family. And now I got permission from an Elaine Halterman, the owner of the farm now. The Brunks in the Shenandoah Valley started here, 1775. Now some of y'all know that I'm working on, with Stephen Knoll, I'm working on a new history book, a summary of Virginia Mennonite Conference. And when I look out down the road 3 years in 2025, it'll be 250 years since Jacob Brunk I was deeded land here in the Linville Creek Cedar Run area. And I'm working like crazy to get this book finished on the 250th anniversary, which is also the 500th anniversary of the founding of this Mennonite Anabaptist faith in Zurich, Switzerland. It'll be the quincentenary, and I don't know if there's a word for 250 years or not, but those are numbers that catch my imagination. He came down here. Now, I have 2 pages in the new Trissels book about details of this. Mid-1800s, most of the Brunks moved on. They moved elsewhere, and their memory here in the valley, in this area, is pretty well lost. Now, newcomers to the valley sometimes wonder, how come there's 3 George Brunks? The first, the second, the third. Well, this George, 1840, and I believe his second wife, Hannah Freed, had a son by the name of Henry G. Brunk. Henry G. Brunk fled the valley during the Civil War so he wouldn't be conscripted into the Confederate forces. He fled north. Is that north?
Yep.
Yeah, he fled north.
My great-grandpa.
Yes, your great-grandpa, Henry G. Brunk. Susanna even caught up with him in Maryland, up in Union Territory. And that story is dramatic. They found each other on some street in Maryland.
Really?
And then he had to leave, and then she brought the family later. And then they decided to move west, and they ended up in, I believe, Illinois, and then they went up to Kansas. Okay? That's where George Brunk I was born. The family name starts right here, with the George Brunk that passed away in 1840.
So this George was the grandfather of George I.
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now there was a George Mason, who I put a picture of in the history book at Trissels. He was named for this George as well, but in a slightly different family. At any rate, George Brunk I knew that his parents were from the valley and ended up moving back here with his family, ended up in the Denby community, southeastern Virginia, Warwick Colony. And that's where he raised his family. He was, in his day, in the 20s and the 30s, the most powerful bishop, at least in the Virginia Conference, if not in the United States, along with Daniel Kaufman. But George I was a very influential bishop back in the day. He had a bunch of children, Ruth Brunk Stolzfus, George Brunk II, okay, George Brunk II then preached the dedication sermon at the 1950 new brick building at Trissels. So George Brunk II came here to preach occasionally, but this is where the Brunk family story begins. In the Trissels book, some of you have read this book before, or proofread it. I put a picture of Braden Brunk, the 8th generation descendant of this Jacob I, who got the deed from Patrick Henry. I taught these Brunks recently at East Mennonite High School. Braden and Ryan Brunk, they're the 8th generation descendants of these Brunks. And the Brunks have been very significant in shaping doctrine, theology, practice. I mean, the Brunks were George I, George II, George III. These are big men of stature, and when they spoke, people listened. They pretty much ran things, unlike the way it is today. It's very different today. There just simply aren't the George Brunks around who sort of laid out. He would sit down there in Denby, Warwick Colony, and write in the Gospel Herald about how things should be. And that's the way it was across Mennonite Church. I wanted you to see this marker. You get the Brunks, the Giles come very soon thereafter, the Showalters come, the Rhodeses come. These are 4 or 5 family groups. You don't get any Yoders coming down here. At one point in the materials, I noticed there was an Amishman who came down to the valley mid-1800s to check out the ground, see if it would be good for an Amish settlement. The man stayed for about a week, visited around, and went back and said, no, we're not moving down here. That's how close it came to the Amish coming down here. But these days, one of the fastest Anabaptist growing groups in the state of Virginia are the Old Order Amish. Their numbers are burgeoning. They're creating settlements. They have 13 settlements now across the state of Virginia, and they're moving in. They don't get in the news. It's very quiet. They're moving in places that other people don't want. They buy farmland, and they're having settlements in the state of Virginia, which is, it's not Holmes County or Lancaster County. They're coming into Virginia for cheap land, and they build it up. Anyway, that's the Brunk family. You'll see a 2-page spread in the history book about the Brunks. It was Gerald Brunk who alerted me about this. He said, Elwood, are you aware of the marker? I said, I have no idea. Right. He put me onto it. Gerald now is on the book committee for the Virginia Conference book that I'm working on. And Gerald is so supportive of that book project, and I really appreciate that. But these generations, down through the years, others have come in, and we'll say more about that later, but here is the 1775 Patrick Henry signed off to give Jacob Brunk the first 69 acres here in this area. Now, there had been a settlement up north around that Hamburg church. There's a church up north, Luray area, but that settlement that way, John, Luray, that way. The settlement, when I came to college in 1976 at Eastern Mennonite, first time in the valley that I've ever been here, I got turned around when I came in the valley, and I couldn't figure out which way north, south, east, and west was. It took me a while, and I'm still mixed up in some regards when I think about which way is north and south, east and west. Lots of people have come into the story, but these are some of the early families that started here. Let's load up and head back to Trissels, and then we'll do a hot dog roast.